Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Moods, Minds, and Manifestations podcast, featuring real people, real experiences, and real talk. And I'm your host, Mocha. So let's get into it. So my guest today is Juliana Corinta. I've had Juliana as my guest previously, and she reached out to me to discuss the topic of absentee parenting. I thought this would be an excellent topic to get into, and the impact that has on the family unit and on the children. So Jules, welcome back.
Thank you so much. And yes, happy to be back again. Hello to everyone who's listening.
Yeah. So Jules, I'll have you start.
So I've been doing a bit of reflecting just because of different things that have happened within, I'd say, the last year and a half, just within my family unit and other people that I know. And so I've been doing a lot of reflecting on my own life. And I was thinking about the role that absentee parents play, or the lack thereof, if you will, in someone's life, and how that impacts pretty much their view of the world, as well as how they interact with other people in relationships, friendships, and so forth. And so I reached out to you because I thought this is such an important topic, not just myself, but other people that I know are grappling with that. Different forms or different stages of absentee parent, meaning, you could have the parent who is just not in the life at all. So you know that your parent exists, but they're not there. You also have where parents who, and I don't know if I'd call them absentee parent, but parents that have died, which I've experienced that as well, and that impact on you as well. And then also you may have a parent that's actually there, but they're really not there. They're there physically, but they're not there for you emotionally, etc. And so it seems as if they're an absentee parent. So I was really thinking about all of those areas and how that impacts somebody in their daily life.
Yeah, it's a very complex topic because I think it affects people into adulthood. I have a friend, a male friend I believe he's in his early 40s, and I know he's had a situation where he knows his biological father. They don't have much of a relationship, and it still affects him today. In his mind, why didn't he want to have a relationship with me? And even now that he's an adult, why isn't his dad trying to, or attempting to forge a relationship with him now, minus that, original family unit and all of that. So it does impact. I can imagine how it impacts the children as well as an adult. So yeah, this is a really, really important topic.
Yes. I did have an absentee parent. And yes, one parent died when I was 3 years old, and then I had my dad die when I was in my 20s. But throughout my life, he was there but not there, meaning that I never really lived with him, but he was in my life because I was living with his family members. So therefore, I would see him on occasion, if you will. Let's say maybe once a week, maybe twice a week. So that as a child, for me personally, was as I've gotten older and so forth. But even as a child, there you get a sense of loss, because remember, you're grappling with, you've lost one parent, and even though you have other people taking the parental role potentially, and then seeing your dad once in a while. Sometimes I would even just see him on the street, like when I was going around, and that I remember being somewhat jarring to me. Imagine having a parent and then you're traveling somewhere and then you see that parent, and it's like, well, I don't think I really spent a lot of time being sad about it. But again, it was very, I would use the word jarring, very strange,
Yeah, and I'm sure in your world, as with everybody else, you compare your situation to friends, family, and my dad was in the home and my mom was overseas, and I don't recall ever really necessarily thinking about it a lot. It was just, it is what it is. But there were times when I would think, well, what would it have been like if my parents were around and caring about me? And, I was raised by my grandparents, but I always admired the connection, even if it wasn't super close, a connection and the presence of other parents, my friends' parents. That was my sort of my guide as to what parenting and having parents would be like, to see what, my other friends went through. So
yes, I understand, and I understand that completely, because yes, you do sort of, without really wanting to, you compare either people or even the family members that are around with regard to that. And there is that sense of loss, and again, maybe you don't internalize it, but you feel as if something is missing, because if you see other people around you and you see how other people are maybe going on trips with their family, parents, and the parents are coming to different events. And I remember even growing up inviting my dad to certain events, and sometimes he would say he would be coming and he never showed up. And so, excuse me, that was somewhat disconcerting. Growing up, you felt just, there was sadness, there was a strangeness, there was what is going on. And I think that carries on without you really knowing it into your adulthood. And then one of the things when I had my children, I had said to my partner then, I had said, I really, he in a sense too also had grown up in a broken home too, meaning that he didn't live with his dad, he was mostly with his mom. So I really made that point to say I don't want to really have children and then be in a broken home, in the sense of, having parents not together. And, sadly, or however it is, or as life would do it, you end up in a very similar type situation in some respects. So when we parted ways, he was, for different reasons, not necessarily always because of him. We were in two different countries too at that time. He was also absent. And so from his children's life, to some respect, to a good extent, I should say, for several years, he didn't see them. And so I look at my own kids, specifically my daughter, and I started to think about the impact that having a parent who is not active in your life, right? How that impacts your relationships, how your view of the world, etc. So, I guess it brought us to this place, and that's when I reached out to you, because I just see it so much with people that I know, but also myself, and how debilitating it can be, right? Sometimes some people are aware that it's debilitating, and then sometimes people are not aware. They're blissfully unaware, if you will, as to how they're operating. So I'm not a psychologist, but I'm saying sometimes you can see the evidence in how people are living their life or the choices they're making, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely. It manifests in different ways for different people.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So how would you say specifically you see, like with your daughter, for example, or with both kids, that it's manifested?
Well, my son is special needs, so it's a little different, but I can see different reactions between the two of them. So one, I remember my son, when he was growing up, for example, when he was small, he would say, I don't have a daddy. I remember him saying that distinctly to me when he was very small, like, a couple years old. And I said, no, you have a daddy. And he was saying, because he saw other parents or other fathers coming to pick up theirs. So he even mentioned that. He was saying, my friend does have a daddy, that person have a daddy, but I don't have a daddy. So I had to go back and show him pictures of his dad and say, no, this is your father. And sort of debunk that, because he really did think that he didn't have a father. And I could see that it made him sad. Even as a small child, he just didn't quite understand that. And then with my daughter, who I would say was closer to her dad than, say, my son is, when we had the opportunity to sort of have him more in their lives, on a regular basis, he did some similar things that my dad did. Like, we had invited him to a few things to see her do things, and he didn't show up, and I saw the disappointment. So it is disheartening, because sometimes when as parents we don't realize the impact certain things have on our children. I know for myself, and my daughter's not really said per se, right? But she's made little things here and there, but she hasn't really said how him not showing up to certain things affected her. But I know that she was greatly disappointed, and she started to mistrust things that he was saying. And that, I think, is really the key as to why I was saying that it does impact you. Your sense of trust in people who say, or they're supposed to claim that they love you, it breaks that trust. And so I think when you grow up and you're in relationships, you have a hard time trusting people. And I think too, in essence, you may even have a harder time forgiving people when they break certain things, even though they may not intend to. Some simple things, because you may recognize similar patterns in people that, in essence, are your first loves. Your parents are your first loves, if you will.
Right.
And when they don't do the right thing, or they break that trust for you, I think you begin to question other people, and it makes it harder for you to trust people, trust the universe, as a result of that. So
my situation is very similar. My kids, I think the last real contact in the home that they had with their dad was at ages 5 and 7. And after that, it was visitations. And then it's, slowly it just stopped, where they weren't comfortable going, and the other parent wasn't, as dedicated as he should have been. And, they just got used to, okay, their home family life just revolves around mom. And for the most part, I would say, because we, made it as normal as we could. And I, as I've said in the past, I've had them exposed to other males, friends, family members, respectable people that they can use as a gauge as to how they should be treated and how, what to expect. So in one sense, I would say that they didn't really necessarily miss that paternal influence, but I'm sure on some level they do. And currently, they don't really have a good relationship with him. They communicate to some extent, but it's really not any strong bond or anything like that. Personally, I don't think that they look to him for any guidance or anything like that. The discipline and guidance and everything has always come from me. As I said, we've, dealt with respectable male influences that if we ever felt we needed a male's perspective, we could reach out to them for that. But there's no doubt that his absence or lack of nurturing and all of that, because when I say absent, they didn't necessarily live with him, but there was always a presence, meaning whether a phone call or we could see him from time to time and things like that. So, and for me growing up, my dad was present in the home. He wasn't necessarily the most responsible parent. His dad, my grandfather, was the male disciplinarian and the nurturer and all of that. We lived in his home, big family home with a few generations. And I just remember my dad always, kind of being like my older brother. He would get in trouble from time to time. So I didn't necessarily look to him for parental guidance. As it is right now, we do have a decent relationship. He's getting up there in age, and I'm having to participate in his care because he wasn't really a responsible person in that regard, didn't really make any preparations for his retirement and things like that. And he's a recent widower, and his wife was maybe 14 years younger than him, and he was very, very dependent on her. So now he's becoming slowly senile, kind of early. It runs in the family. And my siblings and I are having to make sure we're rallied around him to take care of him, even though he really was not a responsible or nurturing parent. But, that's just how it is. You have to do what you have to do. And for me personally, I just adapted somehow in my life to just taking care of what I needed to take care of. I didn't have my mom around. The home I grew up in was my dad and his parents. His parents raised me. My mom was overseas and I did not grow up with her. So I only formed a bond with her later on in life. And now as an adult, we have a really, good relationship. It's not the greatest, but we forged a relationship as adults. As she's getting older, I voice my concerns with her health and all of that. And, she listens. So I'm glad we have that adult relationship. But still, as an adult, you can't help but miss certain things or wonder what path I would have taken had it been different. Had they stayed together in their marriage, had I grown up with my mom, which I didn't, how my life would have been. But in retrospect, because she lived overseas in the United States and I grew up in Jamaica with my grandparents and my dad around, I remember going to the United States the first time and it was like culture shock for me, and just certain ways that she lived her life and certain things were just so foreign to me. And initially, there was not a good relationship, and I eventually left that unit and more or less reverted to what I knew, went back to Jamaica and all of that. But there's something to be said about when you're not raised by your parents, it can also be a positive, as strange as that might sound. Because if their lifestyle, if their choices, if their perspective, if their path is just so different from who you are, especially as an adult, who you are at your core, it's a blessing in a way that they did not raise you, if you want to look at it that way. Because it's like, in my case, I would say from the age of 10, I had to do a lot of thinking for myself. Yes, my grandparents were around. At least one grandparent was around. She was older. My grandfather, who was the patriarch, the one that handled everything, took care of the family, he died when I was around 10 or 11. And my grandmother slowly deteriorated with Alzheimer's. So from a really young age, I had to really think and be aware of my life and what I wanted from my life, because my dad, while he was present, physically present, was really not involved. He was in his own world. And I just remember, again, thinking, had I been influenced by them and the way they chose to live their life, I just don't know what my life would have been like. I kind of see it as a blessing, if you want to call it that. But no doubt there are things that I feel I really would have preferred to have had, their presence and to feel the love. I definitely felt the love from my grandparents. So I'm thankful for that. I can't imagine if I didn't have that. They were the kind of people that just the neighborhood, everybody just kind of turned to them, and they were very welcoming. They raised other family members. They were just really the foundation of so many people's lives. So at least, I had that. And I really, really wish I had the opportunity to speak to them and deal with them on a regular basis, because they were so, so wise. But, all those years of not having an adult around to get guidance from, I found it somehow. I've found the guidance somehow, sometimes even from strangers. Different people come into your life, and I'm happy with the person I am. I'm happy with the kind of parent I am. So that's why I say sometimes if that parent or parents, they're not bringing certain things to the table, maybe it's a better situation. As much as the person that's affected might feel that they're missing out, parents are human, and the word parenting is very subjective too, because certain things that we take seriously, other people just figure I birthed you and that's enough, or I was part of the reason you're here and they think that's enough.
Yes.
It has its pros and cons for them being absent or barely there. And as you were saying with your daughter, where she, may have a hard time trusting people and all of that, it's like, I think it's a teachable moment when you teach your kids that parents are human, and everybody comes with, whatever path they're on, whatever lessons they have to learn. When you humanize parents, I think it helps them put things more into perspective, because it's like they don't necessarily judge themselves based on who their parents are. It's like you're an individual, your parents are an individual.
True.
And in in some cases, like even with my kids, trying to explain to them that sometimes your parents are just a vessel for you to be brought into this world. It depends on how you look at it. Like, I feel we're all souls, everybody's here on a path and to learn something or to accomplish something. So if you had to be here, you had to be brought here somehow, with two parents. So that sometimes the role is just really, that's just the role, but it's of course, being human, and you see how society works and all that, of course you can't help but seeing your life in terms of how society operates. So
the family unit. I understand what you're saying. Yes.
Your case is a certain way. Mine is a certain way, where their dad, again, they know who he is, and I made sure they know who he is. But my younger one, she made a comment the other day. He seems to focus on the older one, whether it's negative or positive, and unfortunately, it's a lot of negativity. But his bond with the older one is a little bit more established because at the time he just was more involved, and by the time the second one came along, he had kind of checked out. But I said, based on your whole life so far and how he's treated you, both of you, how he's behaved, his involvement, I said, why do you want to be validated by someone who hasn't really proved that he cares? You need to be discerning about who you want validation from. And that's the same in relationships, friendships. Of course, as a human, you want to be seen and heard and accepted and loved and all of that. But it's like you have to be discerning who you're trying to get all that from. Is it good people, good, respectable, responsible, kind people, or just people, like, especially with young people on the internet. It's like, you put, not even just young people, just people in general, that's seeking validation, selfies and all of that stuff. It's fine. Yeah, you want to show off and that's normal, but sometimes I think it's just excessive. I tell both my girls, what is it that you're hoping to get from putting yourself out there? You don't know these people other than one or two friends or whatever, but it's like you're seeking validation from people you don't know, and what kind of people are they, So just be discerning, and the same goes for a parent. If the parent who is a human being, whether good or bad or however you want to put it, somewhere in between, are you wanting validation from this person that might be a fragmented person?
That's true. That's
true. That's something that you have to really discern. And in the same respect, it's like whenever a new person comes along, whether relationship, friendship, or whatever, you really just have to deal with people on a one-on-one basis, because person A, even if that person A is your dad or whatever, is different from person B, and they're bringing different experiences, thoughts, perspectives. So you really just have to discern how to interact with each individual, whether male, female, or whatever, on a one-on-one basis, because again, dad could be fragmented, mom could be fragmented, both mom and dad could be fragmented people at their core,
right. So. And that's such a valid point. I was thinking also too of the aspects. So that's a good way for us to try to help our kids, if you will, if we see that there's concerns, and a valid point being made about the validation. One thing I was reflecting on is also to choice of partners, and if absentee parenting makes us, I don't want to use the word makes as if there's no choice, but maybe the choices we make with partners later on is impacted by that, good or bad. And I say that because I see some people who, say people in my own life, close people to me, where I see it almost as if they're overcompensating for having an absent parent, so they end up being the one-offer, and that causes them excessive stress, right? Because they want to be this perfect parent or perfect partner. And then I see the opposite, where we also end up choosing people that are very similar, like just the same as what we came from, and how that sometimes can damage people. I like your positivity, and I like the way you're going. So that idea of, and I guess it comes from the idea of where do you get your self-worth from, really? Is it from having a certain kind of family unit that people tell you that you have to have? Are you trying to get, as you say, validation from the parent, and also too, maybe it was, a godsend or a blessing that, as you say, you didn't get to live with that parent. So, I mean, sometimes I reflect on that too. I wonder what my life would have been had, certain things happen. So I guess, to encapsulate it, there are positives and negatives to both sides, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But again, speaking from my life experience, from childhood coming up, the emphasis should be helping our kids and just helping people, not just our kids, anybody listening. There's a saying, blood is thicker than water, which I don't believe in that, because most of the positive impact I've had from people have been strangers or people unrelated, people I've worked with. It's just different people come in and out of your life or you cross paths with. And I just take the positives from that. And that whole thing about blood is thicker than water did not work for me. That has not proven true for me. So I just have always taught my kids and live my life, just deal with each person on a one-on-one basis and see how that relationship is. And also, if you take time and really reflect on what it is that you want for yourself, and once you have that clear in your mind, then, regardless of what each person brings, then you can be discerning if that works for you or it doesn't. And it doesn't matter who the person is. It could be some person of authority in your life or a parent or whatever. But it's just, if that person is not coming with the right energy or not treating you right, then you have to just set boundaries,
True.
And that will help, especially with friendships and partners and things going forward, where, they know how to respect themselves and what's okay. What should love look like? Love shouldn't hurt. Relationships sometimes take work, but where do you draw the line of, having to work too hard to get something to work? So I think it's important that we as parents and also as just individuals have some clear understanding of what works for us and what doesn't. And then once that's set, and of course, if we have that set in our kids from a young age, it'll make it easier for them to just, stop the wrong kind of person in their tracks before they even get started, right? I remember as a kid comparing my life to my friends who, all had their parents and their parents were very involved and doing all the regular stuff. And that's not to say that their relationships with the parents were super loving or super nurturing, but the parents, from my view, were doing all the basics, the absolute basics.
Yes.
I didn't necessarily know the dynamic of what, went on in their home and, if they hugged and, all of that stuff. But I just know those parents were always doing the basics. And I always felt certain things, or I knew certain things were lacking in my life. But after a while, I just accepted that's just my life. And I just did whatever I could do to make my life as quote unquote normal as possible.
Yes.
Another thing is just to really instill in your kids and even friends, anybody we come across that seem fragmented, or, we're all fragmented, but some more than others, based on their experiences. But even just people that we know, adults even, they can't judge themselves based on how their parents were. And if, for example, you had a traumatic childhood or a difficult childhood, it shouldn't be to the point where it's still affecting you in a negative way. If you need to get help, speak to somebody, get therapy, then do so. It shouldn't be where it's still manifesting into your adulthood. That's where you need to pull up your big boy or big girl pants and take charge of your life and make changes, especially if you're not in that situation anymore, or you've been long, away from that situation. There's no need for it to just cripple you or make your life so difficult.
Yes.
That's not to say your feelings aren't valid, but it shouldn't be to the point where past situations, childhood wounds are still dominating your life and affecting how you treat other people.
Yes.
Everybody has gone through something in life, some more than others. And I've seen people that have been in a lot worse situations than I or you, and they still thrive. They do self-care, whatever they need to get them to a place where they're good, But then you have other people who, in my mind are, intelligent people, but it's like they carry around these wounds and they, project it onto other people. Sometimes, I've even had conversations where I've brought things to people's attention of how they behave. And it's like they refuse to even acknowledge it. And they move on to the next person or the next relationship. And rather than fixing themselves, for example, staying single and reflecting and working on themselves, making themselves whole, they move to the next relationship and bring that baggage that's swept under the rug. And, it's only a matter of time before that, rears its ugly head. I think people in general need to be good with being alone, being whole as themselves. I mean, nobody wants to be lonely and alone and all of that, but there's something to be said about being whole within oneself and being good and
content
being
with where you are. Yeah.
Not just content, happy with being alone. Alone doesn't necessarily mean lonely.
Yes.
People say, oh, that person completes me. And that, whole thing of soulmates, a lot of people think, soulmates is a romantic partner that you just gel well with and everything is great. Yeah. But soulmates come in different forms. Yes. My understanding, they could be family members, they could be friends, they could be strangers. Those are the ones that you have a special bond with. And hopefully whatever they're bringing to your life is light and love and joy and things like that.
Yes,
and,
love,
so...
No, I get it, and you're right. And I think when you talked about a couple of things, one, the crippling effect. Sometimes we're crippling ourselves in not. I guess the word is curing ourselves, meaning that sometimes. I mean, you see it. I know I've seen it, as you said. People who just kind of bounce from relationship to relationship, and they just bring their toxic energy, whatever baggage they're holding on to, and then they. I don't want to use the word damage, but almost as if, they maybe damage that person, so to speak, right? With their toxicity, and then they just move on when things blow up. And so that responsibility of healing yourself self is important. And also I like the idea of something you mentioned too with regard to being realistic about people and about humans. Part of the forgiveness part of it, especially if you come from and you may be holding on to situations where you're blaming parents. I know someone personally right now who is constantly blaming his mother for this and that. His mother didn't like him, his mother this and that. And I keep trying to get him to see too that his mom is human, and trying to just get him to understand that he needs to look at the situation a little bit differently. And he just refuses. And as a result, sort of everybody he gets in contact with or relationships in, I think they suffer from that because he's just not willing to let go or deal with or move on from that particular hurt that he experienced.
And that's just the nature of people and being fragmented, and everybody's here on a path and we're at different stages on our growth and awareness. And it might be hard for some of us to fathom how you can sit in that mindset and never grow from it. But just some people, they, for whatever reason, maybe they're just not strong enough mentally to pull themselves out of it. Maybe it's just ego where they're, they just can't see anybody's perspective other than their own. That might be just a spiritual thing, right, based on their level of awareness and evolvement and all of that. So humans are just very fragmented, and the ones of us that are more stable, quote unquote stable and aware, it's hard. It's really, really hard. It's burdensome to a certain degree to have to always be the bigger person or be more compassionate and all of that, because again, we're all fragmented, but some of us, the more aware we are, it's a more burdensome and the more weight we have to carry, because it's you just have to kind of end up meeting people where they are, but at the same time it shouldn't be to the point where you're compromising your values, compromising your boundaries, and you just have to be discerning. If it's a situation where you don't have to be too attached or involved, then don't be, You can still be compassionate, but not to the point where you're putting yourself in some compromising situation or whatever. So
yes, right. Something that's not, good for you. Yes,
right.
Exactly.
And also the notion that sometimes we choose partners that reflect things that we're lacking. That's true to a certain degree. Sometimes it may just be something simple as a spiritual lesson where if you don't learn it, you're going to have to repeat it. And it means that not necessarily that you pick that person, but that lesson that you're here as a soul to learn will present itself again. And if you are not aware of your patterns of behavior, then you'll repeat the scenario. So, and that's just how it is. So,
it is heavy in the sense that it is an emotional, and I don't want to use the word burden. I want to say more like quagmire, right? Because it's that balancing act that you have to have, as you said, being the bigger person, and forgiveness is critical to it. Because I had someone tell me recently how they were trying to get closure also with a family member, and they realized at a certain point that they weren't going to get that closure with that person, because whatever they needed to get, they weren't, as you say, meet people where they are, that person wasn't able to provide it. So they, in essence, said, okay, I'm just going to move on from this, right? And so they, in essence, happen to be the bigger person in the situation. So I agree with you, and it is burdensome, because sometimes you want people to own, say they're still around, you want them to own what they may have done, right?
Absolutely.
Just say your part in the puzzle, like you want them to say, oh yes, you did do, etc. Now I know we grew up with the idea too that at a certain point, as you say, put on those big boy, big girl pants, right? And decide that you're going to have to move beyond it. Like, you can't keep blaming people in your past for everything that's happened to you. Because some people sit in that as well, so that they don't have to do
the work.
They don't have to move on, or they don't need to do the work.
Right.
So there are many, many lessons there. And for me, as I said, when I reached out to you with regard to this topic, I was thinking, I just wanted for us to have that awareness, for people to talk about what their feelings are with regard to that, because some people aren't even doing that.
Right.
They aren't even acknowledging that there's anything there at all.
They're carrying it around with them for years and years and years. And
yes.
The whole thing with closure. I think it's important for people to not seek closure from other people, but seek to close it themselves, close off whatever it is. But one key thing in that is to always, if you're able to get things off your chest. So if the person, if the person that you feel has wronged you or damaged you, be clear with them, whether it's writing a letter or saying it in person. It doesn't have to be contentious, but just get your point across as calmly and politely as you possibly can, but just communicate that to that person. And I think just getting that off your chest, that should be enough to get closure, because again, people are fragmented and they may not be able to give you what it is that you're looking for. So you have to be able to just speak your truth and let that be enough.
That's true. Yeah,
so,
because some people cannot take what you're trying to tell them, what you're trying to dish out, what you're trying to say, and that owning, it's in a sense owning your own power, right? To say, this is not acceptable to me. I was recently talking to somebody about the saying no, because some people can't say no, right? Or they feel like they can't say no to other people when it comes to things. And that owning your sense of self-worth and owning your own voice and understanding, not accepting things just because, but understanding your boundaries, as you say, and not having people cross it. That's tough for a lot of people. It is a journey, but that's going to be critical as well, I think, in the healing process,
Yeah, I think a lot of it just has to do with, people's level of awareness. And the more people are aware of themselves, aware of their needs, aware of their shortcomings. And I think just based on society, I mean, the world in general tends to be a lot in their ego, where it's hard for them to give grace to other people, to be mindful of other people. And that's not to say each person's feelings aren't valid. Your feelings are valid. But just like you have feelings, the other people have feelings as well. But I think what's key is just really for everybody, every individual, child, man, woman, anything in between, to just be aware that we're all, if you want to look at it from a more spiritual point of view, we're all individual souls here on a path, on an individual path. We're at all individual levels of growth and awareness. And, you know, all you can do is control your energy, you know, how you look at things, your growth, your willpower, all of that, and not put certain expectations. I mean, yes, you live in this world and you live in society. Of course, there's certain core expectations, but at the end of the day, always just keep in the back of your mind that the next person, even if it's a person, an adult, an older person, somebody of authority, they are essentially a human soul just here to learn and have experiences. And even a young person, a child, may be even more evolved than an adult. Even though the adult has had more life on earth, it doesn't necessarily mean that they know more, they know what's best. It just is on an individual basis as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, I understand.
So I think as long as we can see it that way and teach our kids and communicate with even an adult that's struggling, for example, if you bring that to their attention, maybe it'll help them put things, you know, better into perspective and hopefully change the way they go about things. But, you know, some people are just so far in their ego, and not ego in the traditional sense, meaning they're mean-spirited and all about themselves. It's just essentially it's ego meaning grounded in self and how you look at the world. Whereas I personally try to look at the world as, you know, I'm part of this bigger entity, you know, and not just one person. That's how I try to live my life. But the average person thinks of it as they're an individual, and that's just how life is and society is and all of that. But I think the more we just become aware of our path and how connected we all are, it, you know, will hopefully help put things into perspective. That's the way I try to look at it, at least.
And I understand what you mean. So yes, I get clearly what you mean. And I think it's a conversation that would be great to continue, in the sense that there may be other people too who have similar but different ways of coping, right? Or different perspectives with regards to the same topic. I see so many people out there, you know, experiencing similar, or, and I don't want to use the word suffering, but they're just caught up in it.
Right.
They're destroying themselves, or, you know.
I certainly hope that this discussion helps people. What I would love to see is that, you know, if we could possibly do maybe some more podcasts where we have people communicate to us their situation and maybe get our opinion. We're not experts by any means. We've just had, you know, our own individual life experiences. But I think it should be interesting if people come with, you know, certain issues. We could put our heads together and give our perspective. Maybe it can help relieve some of what they're going through. So that's something that we can maybe look into doing, you know, here in the future. Continue this conversation and just other conversations, because between the two of us, we've had, you know, an interesting childhood, the way we grew up, you know, our situation with spouses and raising kids. Again, we're no experts, but we've lived what we've lived, so we can, you know, hopefully that will help someone.
Yeah, because people are in need of healing, and as I said, I can picture so many people that I know that are going through different stages of, if anything, the same process of healing, you know, getting over that hump. And I would love to hear other perspectives, but also to again continue just the discussion, because some people lack the awareness they're even doing it, like you said.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's half the battle there, and then the
That's half the
ones,
battle, yeah.
some are aware of it and just refuse to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
What I find really hard is just people that they seem on some level aware that they're aware, but then they just, in order for them to deal with it their way, they just move on. And then again, they get into new relationships without healing. And then it just perpetuates that whole toxic cycle and brings darkness or misery to the next person, or they themselves, whatever baggage they're bringing with them, they torment themselves by trying to hide it rather than, addressing it and then letting it go. So it's just a vicious cycle. And I think, just awareness and letting go of ego, just so people can grow. If you have the mindset that you know everything, or, you're perfect, no matter how much you think there's always something more that you can learn, and even from a young person. So that, I think just people need to be a little bit less in their ego.
Get out of their own head type of situation. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, this was definitely a really deep, heavy topic, and I'm hoping that it helps even one person out there. And again, we'll definitely continue to have these discussions.
Many experts out there too, actually.
Absolutely. Every perspective is welcome. The whole goal is just to find solutions to make happier people.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
All right. Thanks, Jules.
All right.
Another good
you
one.
You have a good one. You're welcome, Mocha. And we'll talk soon, okay?
All right. Thanks. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. If you haven't already done so, please like and subscribe to hear upcoming podcasts. And please share with family and friends. Thanks for listening.